Worried about letting someone else pick out the perfect avocado for your perfect impress them on the third date guacamole? Well, good thing Instacart shoppers are as picky as you are. They find ripe avocados like it's their guac on the line. They are milk expiration date detectives. They bag eggs like the 12 precious pieces of cargo they are. So let Instacart shoppers overthink your groceries so that you can overthink what you'll wear on that third date. Download the Instacart app today to get free delivery on your first 3 orders, while supplies last. Minimum $10 per order. Additional terms apply.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
And each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our guest is Francesco. My brain just totally fucking brain farted. Jesus Christ. This week, our guest is Francesco Loschiavo, the showrunner of the new Screambox series Tales from the Void, which are based on stories from the Our No Sleep community. And depending on when you're listening to this, there are new episodes up on Screambox now, depending on when you're listening to this. But welcome to the show!
Thanks for having me, guys. Excited to be here. Thanks, Mary and Terry.
Yay!
We're very excited to have you on and talk about your pick in particular. But let's start at your current project. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about Tales from the Void?
Yeah, for sure. So Tales from the Void is a episodic anthology TV series. So it's 6 episodes. All of the episodes are based on popular no sleep stories that we adapted into about 30 to 40 minute episodes of television. And each episode is sort of celebrating a different subgenre of horror. We brought in some really awesome directors. We had Joe Lynch and the Adams, Marit, and myself all direct. And yeah, it's kind of a celebration of online kind of horror stories. I have had it described to me by an audience member, one of our screenings, as like a fucked up Goosebumps for adults, which I could not have said better myself. I was like, that was kind of exactly what we were going for. So yeah, that's the show, and it's on Screambox and on Super Channel starting, depending on when you watch this, Sundays and Mondays in the month of October.
So I got to see an episode of this on the big screen at Fantasia. It was the Adams episode from Toby Poser and John Adams, and it really adult Goosebumps is such a good way to describe it. It's just got that because I am an avid no sleep reader. And so it's really cool to see some of these stories brought to life, and the way y'all do it is really cool. And I was curious, why no sleep? What about Our No Sleep attracted you into creating the series?
I think it was because I kind of grew up on Goosebumps and Tales from the Crypt, and there was this show in Canada, Freaky Stories, and we used to have all these
with the
weird,
cockroach, the maggot and the cockroach.
Yeah, the maggot and the cockroach.
I only know about this because my managing editor at Dread Central is also Canadian, and he talks about it all the time. And it's like, what is this? And it's a fucking cockroach and a little maggot guy that are
It's the best.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
It was literally like a cartoon with a maggot and a cockroach hosted it, and it was like an anthology
for children.
It was for children, and it was literally I must have been 8 or 9 or something. It was Dragon Ball Z, Pokemon, and then it was Goosebumps and Freaky Stories, and then it was Are You Afraid of the Dark? That was the weekday night was that kind of run through. So it kind of ties back to why I ended up pulling stuff from No Sleep, is because I was reading that for years, and I was kind of why am I so into this? And I think it was because I missed that 30-minute, really short, snackable, fun horror show that's there's a lot of anthologies out there right now, but I think some of them lean more comedy, and I just really liked some of the disturbing stuff that used to get under my skin as a kid. And I was well, there's so much great stories on here, and I found myself reading them every night. I would stay up till 1 a.m, and my wife would be like, you have to stop reading these because you don't sleep. And then I just thought why has no one made this into a TV show? And I started talking with the guys who did the podcast and some of the writers. And as soon as I had seen I think Spielberg and Ryan Reynolds companies bought some of the bigger stories, I kind of realized like the short stories are just getting left behind. Like people are picking up the like 8-10 chapter stories that get posted on there and trying to build a whole TV show. So I just thought like, if no one's gonna, like mine for gold for these amazing kind of stories that are sitting here, like why don't I just try and do it? And I honestly just tried to make a show that was what like adult me kind of would have wanted to see. Like I guess I grew up on those kind of kids versions of what I think this show is, and it's like, how do we just take that and make it darker and kind of stay true to kind of internet horror and the Reddit community.
Hell yeah. Oh, that's so cool.
That's so cool.
I love that. And I love that because I feel like we don't have something like this, which is weird to say because we do have a lot of good horror TV. And it's like I think we're in a really good era of horror TV, but it's either like continuous series or, like you said, more comedy. And I like how this series is a little bit scarier. Yeah, and is a little bit leading into like the dark horror. Maybe fantasy is the wrong word, but there's like a little bit of that whimsy also sounds funny, but like I promise that's a good thing in terms of just like the vibes. I like it.
Yeah, we tried to like just not shy away from some of the darker subject matter. Like I think Plastic Smile, well, we kind of lean into it. The ending there is quite dark, and there's a couple other episodes that are like that, and we don't do excessive like gore, but when we do, it's like pretty impactful. And then we have a lot of stuff that's like on the edges of the frame that's quite creepy, that's suggested in a lot of the episodes. And we tried to like John, my co-showrunner, and I kind of are big Twilight Zone fans and Black Mirror, so we tried to like infuse each episode with kind of thematic things that are kind of social commentary. So that was a big part of it as well. But yeah, I think like the one thing I always say that I think makes the show a little bit different is like I love Cabinet of Curiosities, but it's an hour and a half. It's a full movie commitment, right? So I really like the like 30 minutes. Some of them are even 20 minutes. And it's like, if you love it, great. If you don't, it's okay. There will be another one in there for you. And I think one of the things that we've really enjoyed about the show is when people watch all 6, maybe they don't like 1 or 2 episodes, but if they kind of, finish the whole soup, so to speak, they find something in there that they like.
Hell yeah.
I had a realization as we were talking, because I was like, I'm pretty sure we've had a guest on that was involved with the No Sleep podcast, and we had Addison Peacock who voiced characters on the No Sleep.
Oh, cool.
And we've also had 2 of your directors, well, 3 technically of your directors, Toby, the Addams Family, and Joe Lynch have been on the podcast before. So this is
amazing.
This is wild.
I'm just friends of the show,
connecting all these like dots.
Friends of the show. There you go. That's great.
But I am curious, what was it like working with Joe and the Addams Family on creating these episodes?
We couldn't have had like better creative partners. Like, honest to God, there was no arguments on this show. Everyone just got behind trying to make the best thing possible. And we had limited resources on our show, and I'm not gonna cry about that because everyone has that story. But I think we made the best of what we had, and I think the guys did a really, really good job. I know Joe was excited to be part of it because I don't think he had done like a sci-fi thing yet. And, Suitable Flesh, I think he was still kind of putting that together when we got in touch with him. So he was excited about that. And then, this goes way back. Like, we've been working on this for 3 or 4 years. And Joe, we owe a lot of the show to Joe because Joe was the first to like read the scripts, see the pitch package, and say like, put my name on things until you get it made, and then call me. And that like went a long way to get this done.
That's amazing.
So he's like, nobody does that. Like, yeah.
No, like Joe Lynch is truly one of like the kindest, most generous people. Like
my God, yeah.
Like I sent him my movie and he like watched the trailer. Like he doesn't have to do that stuff. And it's just like, he just cares so much about getting these projects made. And it's like you said, there's not a lot of that. Like that's so rare. And the fact that we have a cool little corner of the genre that is are willing to use their little bit of influence to help people like us. It's like, it's so nice. Like, it's just like, people are good. People are good in this world. It's nice.
And that's the thing. You hear about like horror stories about people in this industry, and like, it's just such a breath of fresh air to work with him. And also, like, to your point, he doesn't have to do any of this. Like, him just saying, I'm going to do an episode,
Yep.
already went so far, but like he did a lot for us behind the scenes and has been really championing the show and directed the hell out of the episode. So we're really happy with that, and that's kind of been like the fun thing about putting this together is you get to work with directors that you love, and we get to have the conversation of saying like, what do you want to do? Because that no sleep mind is very deep, and we'll find something that kind of is aligned with whatever interests you
Yeah.
have, and we try to pair people with stuff that they like. And John and Toby as well were like amazing, and it was a lot of fun with them because like they do a lot of their own stuff, and
Mhm.
there's a lot of conversations about like you don't have to do your own stuff. Like we're gonna give you a lot of tools, and you guys can have tons of VFX and extra time on set and stuff. And I think what was fun with them is I had just seen a Hellbender in The Deeper You Dig, and I actually wrote Plastic Smile, and I was like, we need somebody that knows how to do a dark fantasy in the woods. And as soon as I
Yeah.
saw both of those, I was like, these are the guys for the job. Like they'll be, like John just
And they
knows where to
killed it.
find the beauty in nature. Yeah, yeah, did an amazing job.
You talked about how there's budget limitations and you're working within a small budget. Well, they're the
Yeah.
perfect ones to go to because they're used to making a small budget stretch amazingly. So I can't imagine a much better team for this initial start of episodes between the ones that you got on board to direct them.
Yeah, honestly, everyone was amazing, and Marie too, who directed Carrie, did an absolutely amazing job, and
Mhm.
Trisha, who wrote that one. It was important for us with a pregnancy episode to be like, maybe the guys shouldn't be directing or writing this one. So that was a good decision.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
appreciate when people are like, hey, we'll actually reach out to women because we do in fact know some women. That's not a ghost, that's my cat, just so everyone knows.
No worries.
But yeah, I love that. Thank you.
Well, I'm embarrassed to say we did one draft of the script, and then it was like, yeah, this is not a good idea.
Hey!
Like, we needed that one draft to realize. Yeah.
Like, oh no,
Yeah.
never mind.
Yeah.
This is not going to work.
Yeah. So we won't make that mistake again. But yeah, no, it was like Marie was great as well, and we were so lucky with the whole team, and I was very fortunate that I got to do show running then directing. We did like block shooting, so it'd be like watch Joe Lynch, go back to my room, throw my shot list out, and be like, okay, I learned a ton today, and then watch Marie and watch the Adams. So like it just every episode of mine got better as I got to hang out on set with the guys, which was a lot of fun.
Oh, that's cool as hell. So before we talk about like your horror history, I am curious, what is your favorite no sleep story?
What is my favorite no sleep story?
Yes, and it doesn't have to be one that you like adapted. It's just like one that impacted you.
I'm gonna get the name wrong, but I was living in England, and there's a story about the Queen's Guard and him seeing like a monster in crowds, but he's not allowed to move because he's the Queen's Guard, and he has to keep a straight face. And it's like the trauma of him going home every night and thinking about what he's seen, but he can't like talk about it or show a reaction in the moment, and trying to figure out if he's like hallucinating or if he's actually seeing something. And I love that story. There's a lot of them that we like our higher concept that we'd like to do for season 2. And I know there's just so much great stuff on there. There's another one about like a park ranger in like northern Canada that's like a UFO based episode that I would love to do. And we've been talking to Joe about there's one that's like a thing. I would say it's the thing on a shipping vessel, which I thought would be really cool. Yeah. So there's so much stuff on there that's great. But the Queen's Guard was always one of my favorites.
That's creepy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I love it. I'm obsessed. No sleep, actually. I literally lost sleep one time in college. I read the Rake story on No Sleep, and I was convinced, like, in my delirious state that the Rake was real. So it did, in fact, scare me. And I was a college student, so, this shit's scary.
It's all new to me. I'm not familiar with that subreddit at all. So like I get my curious joy through.
Well, hopefully you can go read the stories from the show. That was one of my favorite parts. Is we like all the writers were like, "Do you want us to take down the stories?" And I was like, "No, I want people to go read the stories after they see the show." So yeah, you can definitely still check them out.
Terry, I'm going to send you some too. Some of my
Please.
favorite, actually, one of my favorite books was a No Sleep story. Was that a No Sleep series, and it became a book. Pen Pal, the Pen Pal series.
Oh, Pen Pal's great. That's like one of the OG original ones.
Oh yeah, like original
Yeah.
scary. I read
Yeah.
it this summer. It's still so good. But anyway, so how did you get into horror? Like, what was the first? Like, was it something you loved as a kid? You got into older? Like, what's the kind of your entry point for the genre?
Maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like everyone's entry to horror is you were shown something you shouldn't have been shown at a young age. I feel like my friends that like don't watch horror movies, I'm like, when did you see your first horror? And they're like, oh, I was 27. I'm like, well, that's why. Like you didn't, you weren't like traumatized when you were like 10, right?
Yeah.
I think I saw The Exorcist like super young because I had like heard about it and like, grew up Catholic and kind of watched that, and that really messed with me. I also saw, I'm trying to think, I kind of grew up on like Chucky and Halloween. But I feel like my initial like intro to horror was like hokey horror movies. Like I remember seeing The Exorcist was like the one that like really messed me up the first time I saw it. But like I remember just seeing stuff like The Faculty that was like not necessarily horror, but like horror like adjacent and like kind of comedy-esque too. But like I hadn't seen anything like that at a young age. And then once I kind of caught the bug, you'd go to Blockbuster and it'd be like, we're renting 5 movies and like, 2 of them would be Chucky films and then another 2 horror and then something else that we would, not even get to watch. So yeah, I think I kind of caught it young.
One of my favorite things about this show is a lot of times what you just said is a common denominator. A, seeing something too young, or B, getting obsessed and then going to Blockbuster or going to some video store and just loading up on them for the weekend. I mean, that was my childhood and into my teens in particular, was loading up on movies and then just watching them, crappy ones, great ones, all throughout the weekend. I always think it's funny how there's like a lot of similarities.
It's so important, that stuff, because like I go to iSource Cinema here in Toronto and Babler Video, and I still rent stuff and bring it home and watch it, and like late fees are killing me, to be honest with you, at some of these places. But like, I feel like you just don't find stuff that you would see on your Netflix screen because it's like the same algorithm. Like it pushes you out of your comfort zone with film. And I don't know. I feel like we've completely lost where I would rent a movie, like it, or like own a movie and go to a friend and be like, this is good, watch this. That never happens anymore because people will say like, hey, like check out this film, and you're like, I'm not gonna remember to go home and like rent that or whatever. Like the idea of like, this is free, I'm giving it to you and you should just watch it. I feel like that was how I learned about so many movies growing up, and you'd have like your friends that you respect their tastes and stuff, and I just feel like that's gone. Like I don't know, I miss that a lot.
Yeah, now it's like I watch this really good movie and like, where was it streaming? And you tell them like, oh, I don't have that service, and then that's it. Like it's not the same.
No,
it's definitely. I wish there was a way to like digitally, loan something to somebody or just make it easier. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like film festivals for me now have kind of replaced that. I try to just like roll deep at a film festival and see as much as I can.
Yeah.
So did movies scare you? I mean, you mentioned the hokey ones. You mentioned Exorcist. Were you a scared kid growing up, or what attracted you to the genre? Was it that repulsion, that scaredness, or did you just enjoy it?
I think it's the feeling. Like I like the rush from it. It takes a lot more to like get it out of me now. I think like Hereditary was the last thing I probably had a serious rush in, but like I feel like I remember where I was and what happened when I had those experiences. Like I remember being in the theater for Signs and having a 45-year-old man grab my hand and was like sweating profusely, and I was like sweating just as bad and like scream at a octave that like didn't know he could hit when the alien's hand came through the the grate in the basement. And like I remember seeing like what was it? Pet Sematary as a kid, and when they do the flashback where the little girl's feeding her sister that has like the spinal disease, and I remember like pausing that as a kid and like sitting up from my couch, and my whole back of my shirt was just soaked. Like I was so terrified. Like I just sweat through an entire shirt in like 5 seconds, and like that's never happened to me before. So I don't know. I feel like horror for me, I just have moments in my life where I'm like, you remember that feeling and that you get it sometimes with comedy too, of like,
Mm-hmm.
really laughing hard at a film that like sticks with you. But I don't know, that's what it is for me. It's a rush, right? You don't get
Yeah.
that kind of roller coaster feeling out of other types of films.
Yeah, it's so funny because like I'm as you were talking, I was thinking, yeah, I can like chart my horror movie watching based on these memories, and Hereditary comes up a lot on this podcast, but that was one of my favorite theater experiences as an adult because the scene where she's up on the wall as a spider,
Oh yeah.
kind of like thing, and it's like you're sitting there in the audience and people's eyes are adjusting and everyone's like all throughout the audience. It's like you remember those moments and they just get ingrained in you because it's like it just shocks you out of normalcy.
That was the exact moment that got me. Like that moment
Yeah.
just, and I feel like, you had the severed head and you had a couple like things building up, but I feel like it was a slow burn to that. And then that
Yeah.
payoff at the end, you're already there in your mind, which is what just made that film fantastic. But yeah, I remember that was a clenched the seat in the theater. And then I remember like 2 minutes later being like, okay, like we're out of that. Like, yeah, it was a
Yeah.
great, great, great film.
Ugh.
Oh yeah. Well, we have talked about your horror history. We've talked about Tales from the Void. But Francesco, what film did you bring with you today for us to discuss?
So I am bringing 28 Days Later. I'm amazed no one has done this yet, and I'm super excited because to me this is the greatest zombie movie ever made. I don't think there will ever be a better one. Maybe 28 years later we will find out. But yeah, one of my favorite films of all time, actually.
Fuck yeah, mine too. So in 28 Days Later, if you have not seen it, please go watch it. Or if you can find it, which we'll talk about
You can
later.
find it.
4 weeks after a mysterious incurable virus spreads throughout the United Kingdom, a handful of survivors try to find sanctuary.
This is another one of those movies for me that I remember vividly seeing in the movie theater, but I am curious. Take us back, Francesco. How did you see this movie? How old were you when you saw it? Give us basically your horror story. I want to hear all the details.
So I was 14 when I saw this movie, and I saw it
Okay.
in theaters.
Okay. Damn.
My mom is English, and we went to England for the first time a couple years later. And I remember walking through a lot of the places that this movie took place. And I feel like
Oh, wow.
this movie, it really affected me at a young age. And then I feel like I revisit it like every 5 years or so. Because there's been a bunch of moments in my life that for some reason bring me back to this movie. I absolutely love anything Alex Garland. I think the guy is like a genius, and like what he's gone on to do has been amazing. But yeah, like I just distinctly remember the feeling of like going in to see a zombie film, and I remember feeling like I don't know if this is going to be any good. I don't like those movies with the slow moving zombies. Like, who's scared of those? You could kill any of those with a baseball bat. And then as soon as it's like, oh, it's grounded in reality, they're infected with rage, they're running full speed, and then in the end, it's not actually the zombies that you're afraid of. It's man, which I feel like is any good zombie movie does that. And it went to some dark places with the soldiers that I just was not expecting it to go. And I remember just like, you think to yourself, like, if I was in a situation like that, like how bad would it get when you're, worried about food and worried about survival and all that type of stuff. And I remember it like affecting me at a young age, but then I moved to England and lived there for 6 years. And I remember my wife and I, one year her visa was up for renewal and we couldn't leave the country. They had taken our passports, and we decided to go to central London on Christmas Day. And it was completely empty for like 15 blocks. I walked like the entire Leicester Square, like Trafalgar Square area, like, and that's where this movie takes place. And I remember thinking like, you could film a whole zombie thing here, right? Like, and you'd get away with it. And that's kind of to an extent how they did it in the show. And I just remember watching the movie again. And then, another 5-6 years later, you have the pandemic. And it's kind of crazy to think about, like, I don't know, those kind of like themes just kind of kept coming back to me. So it's a movie I watch a lot. And it's had a weird thing in my life of just having moments where something happens and it reminds me of it and I go back and watch it. And it's just always affected me. And yeah, like the kind of like what mankind is capable of when they're afraid and kind of isolated, I think is a really interesting theme that a lot of horror touches on, but I think they did it the best in my opinion.
I agree, but I am curious. So when you first saw it as a kid, were there specific scenes that you remember like just boring into your head? Because I know even my age, and I was an adult at that point, there are specific scenes that were seared into my head. What about it? I mean, were there moments that terrified you?
Yeah, so I think when they separate Cillian Murphy from the girls and they are having the discussions about like, repopulating and all that, like super fucked me up. Obviously the eye gouge scene, like that's one I'm never gonna forget. And obviously the beautiful shot of the drop of blood from the POV of the blood into Brendan Gleeson's eye will forever be like one of the greatest horror shots. And you watch that back now and you're like, how did the army not show up like 3 minutes before this? Like you guys are clearly in the woods. But those three moments really stood out. And then obviously like the priest in the church, and the first time like the guys kind of stand up and the priest very clearly has something wrong with him, like, and just kind of jolting around. You're still trying to figure out what's going on. Just so many great moments, but like the eye gouge for sure. And like, you're not really sure if Cillian Murphy, is a zombie or not at the end. I thought it just like, it really kind of messed with me how he went to that like animalistic state.
God, yeah. I saw this movie at a super young age too. I cannot for the fucking life of me remember how old I was. Cause I saw it at home. I didn't see it in theaters. I saw it on DVD. And I must have been like 10 or 11. 12? An age of which I was probably too young, but my dad showed it to me anyway, because this is how we bonded. And I had never really been... I think this was one of the first zombie movies I really remember seeing. Like, it's a high bar
to set.
I know, from the first one, right?
Yeah.
I know. Yeah. Like, it's what I think it really was, though, because if I'm thinking about it, this might have been one of the first zombie movies I ever saw. And I was fucking so... From the very beginning, like, when the animal rights activists break into the lab and release the monkeys, I was like, sorry, chimps, whatever. My husband gets very mad when I'm not correct about which is which. It just immediately set me off of like, oh no, this is not going to be normal.
When she starts vomiting in that first scene.
Yeah, it sets a tone, right? Like early, yeah.
Well, and also the way that this also sent me down like a Danny Boyle obsession. Like this Danny Boyle like changed, like one of the filmmakers that like changed the trajectory of my young life in terms of me like learning about cinema. Again, should not have been watching his movies at the age I was, but who cares? It doesn't matter. But what I love is the handheld aspect of this movie. Yes. I think that really threw me off because this was around the time that I had seen Blair Witch Project. I cannot remember if I had seen it yet or not, but it felt so real, and that really freaked me out. I wasn't used to a narrative movie having that feel. Like, it wasn't found footage, but I felt like I was there with them rather than...
It feels like it.
It feels like it could happen to you. Like, that's the thing about the film is, like, the grounding in, like, it being a rage disease that they were testing in a lab. And, like, there's just so much of, like, little attention to detail there that it feels like it's possible. And I don't know, I feel like after the pandemic, it definitely felt like that could happen. So yeah, 100%. And he does like that. I don't know how you explain it. It has like a grit to it.
Yes, it's
like it feels home video, but it's not like shaky handheld. And
that's exactly.
It has like a lot of grain on the texture of the film, and it's like it's just it's beautiful. Like it's beautiful, but it's also like it's dirty. Do you know what I mean? I don't know how to like describe that, but the aesthetic is like stunning in that film.
That's the thing that surprised me when I remember watching it for the first time was I'm used to like the movies being very polished in like presentation and very just sort of we're going for the cinematic beautiful like thing, and this movie felt ugly in a positive way and not pejoratively, but just like it was filmed like it was like you mentioned on a home video. It reminded me of some VHS era, like the first time I watched Texas Chainsaw Massacre in college on a VHS that had been played too many times, and so it like had like this scratchy grit to it on top of it already being a gritty film. But that's what this film seemed to be kind of designed to do. And I don't know, I love the look of this film because it is so unpolished in its presentation.
100%. And I think the crazy thing too is, like you mentioned being like a Danny Boyle fan, is like, I remember seeing this and being like, who is this like horror god filmmaker? And then you look at his like catalog and you're like, this is a guy that did The Beach and did like all these other like that are completely different. Like the range of what he can do, like Trainspotting is like, it's just unbelievable. Like I'm a huge Sunshine, what? Right? Like crazy good sci-fi. Like his range is just nuts. And I think it's like super aspiring to be like, you can do it all. Like he's kind of got that like Kubrick-esque, like I can do any genre and do it my way and it'll still be great.
Exactly. And that's like, I think like Alex Garland, as divisive as he is, I also love Alex Garland. Like,
me too.
It's hit or miss, but also like
he's amazing.
Such like he just is just like, I don't fucking care. Let me just do it. And I think that's how I feel about these filmmakers, because I mean, like, it's just so risky and cool. I'm just reading about how they made the movie and all like the weird shit they did with like putting buses on the side and doing it really fast and like being able to capture. Because I did a similar thing, Francesco, when I went to London and I walked around as a teenager and was like, how did they do this in this movie? Like there are people just fucking everywhere, even like, and it was just so, it makes you like appreciate it even more walking that area to see like what they accomplished and how just terrifying it is to see such an empty place and an empty city. It doesn't, and like, because I feel like we see that all the time now in like video games, but also in like, you know, The Last of Us and The Walking Dead, but it all is very set. It feels very set. It feels very CG. And this is just London.
Yeah.
And it's a weird thing though, like when I was saying about like coming back to it, is like, you know, I had this Christmas in London that was super lonely and reminded me of this film. And then I was living in New York when COVID hit in like a 1-bedroom apartment with my wife, and like our family was back in Canada, and we'd go walk to Times Square and it would be empty. And like, there's something about the emptiness of a city to me that always connects me with this movie. And it's scary. Like it's terrifying when you see like, you know, man-made sculpture, or like statues and whatever, and buildings and all this stuff. And there's no people. Do you know what I mean? There's something like just really interesting about that. And I think the story of how they captured that is like insane. Like you cleared out Leicester Square for like an hour with a helicopter and like managed to get all these crazy shots. Like it's just
wild.
Like when you look at the budget of that movie and what they pulled off, it's insane. It's honestly insane.
It's like $8 million or something. And I looked at that and I was like, are you fucking kidding me? This is $8 million. Like,
it's insane. It's
beautiful.
I don't even know how they did the zombies to the level that they did them with that money. Like it's unreal. Like the prosthetic stuff is like really good in the film. Like, and they have great, and like everyone who is in that is like a huge actor now.
Yeah.
Like Cillian Murphy's like the it guy. Like almost like Naomi Harris was like went on to do amazing stuff as well in Moonlight. Like, yeah, I don't know. It's such a great film. And I love that, like, even if you aren't a horror person, you can like get into it. I remember I went in London, they do this thing, Secret Cinema, where they like recreate a film in like a warehouse. And they did one for 28 Days Later, and it was like you had to come in a hazmat suit and you had to take shots and you had to go in, and there was like a zombie attack and whatever. And then when they screened the film, it was individual beds like the monkeys in, and they strapped you in. And they had the screens with the movie on. And that was how my wife got to see it for the first time. And it was like,
no way.
Yeah, it was awesome. Yeah, it was, and it was cool because I didn't let her like see a trailer or anything. We like did the live theater thing and then went to watch it. And then she knew what all the stuff she just saw was. And I was like, yeah, it was awesome.
That's fucking amazing.
That's the coolest thing ever.
What a first watch. Like that is the perfect first watch.
It was so much. They need to do that in more cities, like Secret Cinema. Check it out. It's the best. They used to do it where they didn't tell you what the movie was. And they would just send you a package and be like, my friend got one that was like, it was a package in the mail and it was like a jail outfit. And it was like, meet us at this prison. And then it was like Shawshank Redemption that they did. And they did, I think it was Doctor Strangelove as well, where everyone watching the movie was at the round table. And it was like a 360 screen, which is so cool.
Oh my God.
Yeah, they have
Oh
some
my
really like
God.
interesting immersive stuff they do in the UK.
That's so cool. Oh, hell yeah. That's
Wow.
terrifying for 28 Days Later, though. I love it, but that's terrifying at the same time.
Yeah, the monkey
cool.
the monkey chair got a little uncomfortable by the end.
Yeah,
I can imagine.
that's very, very valid. But like going back to the zombies in this, or infected. We'll say zombies just for the sake of talking about it.
Yeah,
but they're also they're pretty simple at the same time, though. It's mostly the eyes, and I think that's what was always so frightening to me as a kid is that they didn't like just gnaw on people, and they didn't just like have the look like they were decaying. They looked like feral animals, which is, I mean, it's rabies, but it's feral animals. And I think, again, that was terrifying to me because I thought, I always thought like, zombies are slow. Like it's super easy to get away from them. And then this kind of threw a wrench in my anxiety plans that I had in my head about zombies. And it freaked me out because I was like, oh no, if they can run, I'm dead. Yeah. Like there's no way. There's no way. The slowness is what saves my ass. And I think they're just so effective in that and just changing a couple things we know about them. Because I think this was like one of, if not the first example of a fast zombie?
Return of the Living Dead.
Okay.
Very first time with running zombies. Because it's something that always like stuck in my... It bothered me before I saw this movie because I was a huge fan of Return of the Living Dead. And everyone's like, this is the first movie with running zombies. I'm like, There's Return of the Living Dead from the 80s. But yeah, it definitely popularized it, for sure.
It's funny. I'm glad you clarified that because I was going to ask. I was going to say, to me, it was the first thing I had seen. But I don't know. Like I always feel like this film for me is there's zombie movies before it. And then there's zombie movies after it. And I feel like The Walking Dead and all these things that did like it's about the people and not the zombies. And like people are actually super messed up. I feel like that, at least I hadn't seen that before 28 Days Later, or maybe they just hit the nail on the head in terms of going to a much darker place than a lot of those other films. So I don't know. To me, it set the bar so high for zombie films. And to your point about the way they did the zombies, like I think that feral aspect of them like flailing their arms and legs around in unconventional ways rather than like the standard like I'm gonna snug you up to your neck and then just come out with like a bunch of blood on my face or like your intestines in my mouth that you see in like every movie. I don't know. I think that made it quite interesting too, is that the kills and like the attacks were quite original because they did move like feral animals, you know? And I kind of liked how even with some of them, it was almost like varying degrees of how like infected they were. Like the priest kind of moves a lot slower than some of the other kind of zombies later on. And, Brendan Gleeson takes a minute to sort of like get into it. So yeah, I don't know. I think they did. It felt unique. And I find that's something hard to do with a trope that's been done so many times, you know?
Because Romero's movies, I mean, like, he really did grapple with a lot of really interesting stuff in his movies in terms of humanity and, like, society and talking about what society is capable of. And I think that Danny Boyle just really took what he was saying and made it even more explicit of, like, everyone's terrible. And I think... And especially because I think this was being filmed during September 11th, it really does feel like such a post 9/11 object that kind of shows like we are in a new era at least as like a Western society. So I think it's such an interesting object of just like how everything shifted. I think it's such an interesting thing.
I think the idea of like, the theme of like, we're not that different from animals. Like with the monkeys at the beginning in terms of our like how brutal we can be, but then also like, and we kind of even touch on this theme in one of the episodes of Tales from the Void, but like I always love the like what mankind is capable of when they're afraid, and I think it goes there in some really dark ways, and to me that's what really like stood out about this film. Like I can't believe they allowed them to make the army stuff at the end, because it just went to a place that like it gets to 11 and then just keeps going and you're like, Jesus Christ.
It's so fun to me hearing this conversation because I grew up with zombie films. Like in the 80s when I was a kid, I loved zombies. Zombies were one of my favorite monsters. Obsessed with Night of the Living Dead, obsessed with Dawn of the Dead, obsessed with Day of the Dead, obsessed with Return of the Living Dead, like all of those types of movies. And I remember in the 90s watching Fulci's Zombie or Zombie 2, depending on how you want to call it, and just being weirded out by this completely different idea of zombies. But what I think is interesting is that everything that you guys are saying is baked into Romero's zombie films. Like it's all about how horrible man is. And particularly like, so watching this, I'm seeing direct comparisons or direct links to, for instance, Day of the Dead with the military aspect of it. Cause Day of the Dead is all about set with these military people who have been together for too long and they're going nuts and they're abusing their ideas of power. And it's all kind of structured around that. And then we have like, Night of the Living Dead that's, is civil rights time, and we have Day of the Dead or Dawn of the Dead, which is all about commercialism and how people are praying at the altar of malls, and so like it's all baked in it. And yet this movie, even though there are direct parallels, feels so fresh in the way that it is doing it. And I mean, a lot of what is happening in the military is similar stuff that happened in Day of the Dead, but it feels shocking here. And I think it's because, for me at least, when I first saw it, it had been probably a decade since I had ever seen like a new zombie movie. Like I would revert back to like the 80s and like the 70s with those types of films. But there was this whole period where zombies didn't exist. No one wanted to touch them in film. And then this movie comes roaring out of the gate, and all of a sudden we're having another, renaissance of zombies that is continuing somewhat to this day with, after this we had Shaun of the Dead, and we had the Dawn of the Dead remake, and we had the Crazies. We had all these types of movies that were pulling from this, but this really caught the zeitgeist in the middle of filming, because this is, yes, Mary Beth, I had to go look up when this was filmed, and I found out that they actually filmed some scenes during September 11th, the September 11th attacks, because this movie feels so post 9/11 and is really capturing the fears and the anxieties of that time in such a terrifying way.
And it's funny that you say that, because I didn't even realize the timing, because it would have been like, what, a year, maybe 2 years after 9/11 that this would have come out. I remember not being old enough to know what the World Trade Center was, and like getting pulled into a room and being shown it at school and being like, oh my God. And then, being exposed to this just like a couple years later. And I think, to your earlier point of like, it didn't invent some of these things that, were done in previous zombie films, but I feel like it's so dense in how many of them it touches on and does it like effectively that it feels like it like reinvented the genre. But like I have a copy of the script and I read it every once in a while, and like, it's insane to me how like economic like Alex is with like word count, and how many ideas he gets across in like almost like half a page. Like if you read the script, the descriptions of the opening scene with the cages of monkeys are exactly designed in the film as it's described, down to the spotlights on each individual monkey. Like that is accurately described, but he does it in like a sentence. Like he's unbelievable at just like cramming it in. And you think about all these themes that he touches on, all the journey, arcs of the characters, the fact that it's a road movie in there too, and like gets through all of that with it still working, I think is like so incredibly difficult to do. And, to your point, I think it pulls from all the best, aspects of previous films, where like some of these previous films, I feel like they'll touch on one of these themes, where I feel like 28 Days Later tackles 3 or 4 of them.
Yeah.
Absolutely. In a succinct way.
So my first watch of this was opening weekend in a movie theater. I would have been, because it came out in 2002 in the UK, and I think it came here in 2003 in the summertime, I want to say, is when it got released. Yeah, June 27, 2020, or 2023, 2003 is when it came out in the States. And I remember opening night, I would have been 22 at the time, and closeted. And this was the very first time that I saw a penis on a screen that was not played for jokes. And so this was like,
Oh, interesting.
this was like a huge moment for me, both in terms of loved horror, loved zombies, loved being scared, but also the sexuality on display here. And it's not sexuality, but it's like, I guess, the nudity. Like, the camera loves Cillian Murphy's body, and he is shirtless in this or naked in this so much. And so like that in itself was like, I feel like I'm getting away with watching something that I shouldn't be watching, on top of the fact that it is this horrifying zombie movie. And so it was this weird connection between like sexy for me, but also absolutely terrifying, because this movie, that, you know, it's the things, I haven't seen this movie until last night for prep for this in a very long time. And I don't know why, but I hadn't seen it in a very long time, because I love this movie, but the things that I remembered are small moments. When Cillian Murphy gets into the church and he goes, hello, and all of a sudden there's a quick shot as this guy just sits up and he's just staring there, his mouth agape, and he's just scary. He doesn't move, he's just like there, just staring, and I'm like, oh, I don't like this.
And it kind of defies the logic of the zombie, that it's not running at him, but it still works, because you don't know enough about what's going on yet. Do you know what I mean? Like that's such a distinct choice of like, it's supposed to run at him, but you know, he hasn't maybe made enough noise, but you don't know what's going on yet.
And the thing that surprised me too is that back in 2002, I didn't see a whole lot of trailers for this. I didn't watch a lot of TV. I remember seeing teasers for it, but they were very specific in what they showed. And I went into this and I was like, oh, that zombie's terrifying. And then the priest comes lurching, and I think this is another way that they kind of subvert expectations. He comes lurching, and it feels like a traditional zombie. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of scary. That's weird. Get out. And then when he leaves the church, they just book. All of a sudden they're running. And I remember sitting in the theater going, that's not how this is supposed to happen.
It all happens so fucking fast too, you know, and again, that's a zombie movie collapsing into chaos very quickly, but it's a very, very different kind of chaos, like fire and Molotov cocktails and like sprinting on fire. We're so used to fire stopping them or like slowing them down, but here it's just like, no, you just made a roaming fireball. So it's just such a different type of chaos than we're used to seeing in the zombie movie, and it happens so quickly. And then it ends very quickly, so it just feels like a jolt, like someone put like the defibrillator on you and woke you up, and you're like, holy shit, I'm back. It's wild. Sorry, Francesco, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No worries. I was just going to say, I feel like this scene is not like everyone's most impactful one, but I feel like it really, like, I love the scene of where Cillian Murphy, after he finds his parents have, you know, killed themselves, and they go into the kitchen, and the other actor's name escapes me, but he tells the story of going to the airport with his parents, and that they had a suitcase of money and like naively thought they could buy their way onto a plane, and then, you know, the infected get into the crowd, and he's realizing that he's just climbing over like a sea of people. And like that scene, like, how many movies have you seen where like the lead has like the monologue of like their backstory, and it's like the slow push in, and it just maybe doesn't work or seems cheesy or goes on for too long. But like, I don't know, that moment to me really encapsulated even like, when you think about the pandemic, everyone had their story of like something that happened to them or a family member that got really sick or whatever. And it felt, I don't know, super visceral. And you don't see any of it. They don't show you any of that moment. And you can connect with, yeah, I would think naively that money would get me out of this or whatever. And it's, I don't know, it's a terrifying thought of like, there's no government, there's no military, there's no travel. Money doesn't do anything. All the rules that you grew up on, that like your understanding of how society works, is now gone, and you're realizing that in a packed airport. Like, I don't know, that scene to me was like, I think it's brilliant. It's so well written.
That whole sequence is really well done when he goes, like, that part when I was a kid, when he goes and finds his parents, like, really fucked me up, because again, you're seeing he wakes up after everything's happened and he's just trying to figure everything out. And to me, him finding that note that says, don't wake up, like release, and his parents, you know, having this obviously very like sentimental moment where they killed, like they killed themselves together. But that note of just saying, like, we hope you're still sleeping. It's such a brief note, but it shatters your entire heart because it really, again, it's a brief moment, but again, it hits that emotional impact. And then that scene with him talking about the airport, again, sets up the emotional stakes of what's been happening so well that then they can move on to another, to the fucking zombie attack and the guy dies and then we're on to the next thing. You know what I mean? Like, it's really, like you're saying, they pack so much in, but it feels right.
That's Alex's economy of words, right? Like, don't wake up summarizes everything you need to know. And that note is so short, but it's so well written. Yeah.
It's incredible. Exactly. Ugh.
I wrote that down as a note when I was taking notes, because I'm like, this note is so impactful. With endless love, we left you sleeping. Now we're sleeping with you. Don't wake up. And it's X. And I'm like, good God. But like watching this now in 2024, I'm reminded about how impactful this film is, because I'm watching the opening sequences where Killian is walking, where Jim is walking through the deserted London, and there's this kind of quiet, sad, and I want to talk about the music more in particular, but there's this quiet, sad, kind of like Spanish guitar music that starts to play, and it sets this melancholic mood, and I'm watching this and going, this is The Last of Us. This is The Last of Us. Mm-hmm. The way that the environmental storytelling is happening here, where he passes multiple walls that are just full of missing notes, or when he goes into the church, and that's another thing that I remember vividly is the repent, the end is very fucking nigh. Like that line, but like the environment tells a story in ways that, again, going back to the economy of words, that you don't need to have dialogue for. And I'm watching this now and I'm like, man, this really did influence the last 20 years of zombie films, zombie video games, zombie everything, which is kind of funny, particularly with the video game, because I did see an interview with Alex that said that he had been playing Resident Evil, and he's like, why hasn't there been any zombie movies? So the fact that he was playing a game, created this, and then The Last of Us, which is arguably one of my favorite games, is taking what this is doing and also like building on it. Is just, this movie is so fucking influential.
I think it was the same year Resident Evil, the movie, came out.
Yeah,
I think
I think
both
so too.
Came out the same year, which is kind of crazy to think
the
of.
duality of man.
Yeah, exactly.
The two genders, 28 Days Later, and Resident Evil by Paul W.S. Anderson.
Oh, man.
Oh, God.
The other thing that that I remembered that like captured my attention as a 22-year-old, and still to this day, is one of my favorite sequences in movies is the finale with that song. I forget what the song is called. It's something
House
about
Without a Heartbeat by John Murphy, right? I think it is. This is one of my favorite movie soundtracks of all time. I think I used to practice that song on guitar when I was like 16. Like, I loved that song. Like, I think it's just amazing. Like, it's just so fucking punk rock, and it works, and it like has like, you know, to your point, it goes into like Spanish guitar and has some like emotional beats, but they are not afraid to kick in the distortion and play like power chords in this film, which is amazing.
Yes.
Side note, really quick from that, just at the soundtrack, when they're in the grocery store and that song starts playing, that's the song that they announced us to at our wedding, me and my husband, because we both love this movie so much, and we use that. It's one of our favorite songs. That was like one of our songs when we first started dating. So I wanted to just bring that in because 28 Days Later was at my wedding, because of how much we love it and how much we love that music. So sorry, just wanted to.
No, that's I forgot about that.
Yeah, I know. I was like, 28 Days Later is playing. I was like, Terry, it's 28 Days Later, and you're like, oh yeah, I forgot about that.
But this last sequence where we're not sure if Cillian Murphy's Jim is a zombie or not. He like embraces the feralness, he embraces the rage, and he is just moving through. The camera starts filming him as if like it's a zombie, and he's moving through this dark house, and it is like it's so gothic, it's so Resident Evil. Like it's lightning is outside, rain is pouring down, we're getting brief glimpses of this man running, he is killing people, he is jamming. That's another scene that stuck in my head, jamming in the eyes that you had mentioned earlier. But it's all set to this song that is just slowly in the background with like almost like a piano, doon doon doon, and then it just starts to build on itself until it is like just loud and dramatic, and it's tied so well to what is happening on screen that this was like I think the first time where I as a film watcher that I like appreciated all aspects of film. Like I followed directors, I followed writers, I followed actors, but like this is like, okay, I need to know more about this writer. I need to know more about this director. I need to know more about this composer. Who is this Cillian Murphy? He is hot. Like, it's like all of these things are just like coalescing in this end that I just was sitting there gobsmacked at what I was watching as a 22-year-old. I love the ending of this movie so fucking much.
It's crazy because I can't picture this movie without that score.
No.
Like I don't think it would be like that build up at the end, and they have the hard cut to silence with Jim and Selena just staring at each other, and she's the silence with him with the machete. Like it's such a dramatic build, and if you look at the composition of it, it's just like, you know, a guitar riff, and then they layer a melody, and then they layer drums, and all of the aspects of it are so simple, but it's just and another layer and another layer and another layer, and now there's nothing. And it's so impactful. Like it's one of those where like I put it in like the Nirvana box, but like if you look at the guitar tab of like how to play it, it's super simple, but it's so beautifully composed. It's so like beautiful, and it's just layering and layering and layering. But yeah, no, I'm glad you brought up the score because I had forgot about that in it. I had that on like I don't want to say a CD. It would have been like one of the first iPods or whatever back in the day, and I love the soundtrack to this film. Yeah,
it's so fucking good. It's so fucking good. But yeah. So oh gosh, I just lost my train of thought.
No worries. I'm sorry. I was excited about the composer that jumped in there.
Yeah, no, I do love the score in this so much that I know John went on to do the sequel, but they also reused the song in the sequel too, and it just
oh yeah.
Yeah. It's a perfect song. It encapsulates my feeling for this movie where it just keeps building. That's what I wanted to say. The way that it builds, and you mentioned how it cuts off when Selena is about ready to hit Cillian with the machete. I have a vivid memory of gasping because the movie sets up that she is, you know, a loner, that she does not believe there's anything good in this world, that you just got to keep moving. And if someone is holding you back, you leave them. It's like survival is it. And we sort of see her progression as a character through this, where she is very closed off. She doesn't want any human attachment. And then we get to Frank and Hannah, and their story is so heartbreaking. But we get to that, and, you know, she starts to like that facade cracks and she starts to smile. But we know deep down that she has told Jim that the moment she sees him and he's turned, he's dead. She's going to kill him. And so by the end of the movie, so much has fallen to shit. Everything that is good has died. The family unit, the chosen family that they have created in this middle section is fractured. And we have threats of sexual assault, and it's anything bad. Everything is horrible. And you're like, I'm just waiting for her to chop his head off because she has said, if I see you turn, you're dead. And so when the music gives out and it freezes, I remember vividly in the movie theater gasping because I thought he was a goner.
100%. Like that build up to me, you like, and it's interesting that like, you know, you mentioned that because you could have ended the movie shortly after that and it would have been good. But I loved that they gave them, you know, their story after. And they have a house together and they have the family unit, and it resolves all of those character arcs that you were mentioning of like her hesitancy to, you know, show affection to anyone and to get attached and whatever. And they actually find like a normal life. I always thought that was like super interesting because most zombie movies start at that and it's already happening, and then it like, you know, they lose their home or whatever, and this started at like the beginning and then getting to that safe haven. which I thought was kind of cool.
Well, and it's interesting too, because like I've written so much about post 9/11 horror, and it's so nihilistic, and this movie is so nihilistic, but there's also that rare glimmer of hope in it that this kind of era of horror doesn't always have, especially with how bleak so much of this movie is. So I think it's a really interesting choice to choose. I'm not necessarily saying it's a happy ending, but like a little bit more of a hopeful ending of like, hey, the family unit can come back together and it's like gonna be kind of broken, but it's not gonna be shattered. But I do appreciate that, I think. I think like as much as I love a good fucked up nihilistic ending, I think there is something to showing a small glimmer of hope. Not a big one, but there is like a small glimpse at what normalcy could look like, or a new kind of normal, which again, like, you know, we see that in all the other stuff where we're mid zombie apocalypse and that whole thing is ruined. But yeah, it's an interesting choice that I think is so, again, what makes this so unique, and that despite how fucked up it is, it also isn't afraid to be optimistic.
Yeah, so one thing that I realized on this watch, and I had been thinking about as we've been talking, because I think, Francesco, you said something earlier that made me think about how lonely this opening is. And I think it might be when you were talking about going to the Times Square and everything was empty. It's just like this feeling of loneliness. And what I find interesting on this watch is the importance of the word hello and the importance of talking, because the first thing we hear out of Jim is hello, right? That's the first thing. He is walking around trying to find human connection, doesn't find it, eventually finds, some people, and they continue on. But that hello is a continuation throughout the entire script, where there's the moment when they stop at the gas station and he goes inside and he is surveying the dead bodies, and there's this woman that is holding this dead baby, and he is jaded at this point, and he says hello, but it's not the same kind of hello, I need connection. It is hello, who's there? And then the kid tries to attack him and he kills him. And then what's the last image of this movie? It's not a sign for help. It's a sign for hello. And they have built it trying to get attention. But it's that word that is continued from the very beginning of the film to the very end. It is this cry for, yes, the world is fucked up, but we need connection. We need to be around people. We need to not have that loneliness that was pervasive in the first part of this film. And I find that so interesting watching it now. And I never picked up on it before, but that repeated use of hello is so, I don't know, optimistic to continue on what you were saying, Mary Beth.
Yeah.
I never picked up on that before, and that's really, really interesting, because it is a deliberate choice what word you're going to put on that blanket at the end. And yeah that's really, really interesting, because it does speak to those themes of like isolation. And I think that's something I've, experienced at different points in my life. And I feel like why I always come back to this film. Cause I don't know. I just feel like I keep ragging on the pandemic, but I feel like the pandemic really opened my eyes to like, I have to be around people for my own health.
Yep.
And this idea of like, not only are you, isolated and alone, but you have to hang out with people that you might not necessarily trust and or like to kind of stay alive is like a really interesting thing.
Yeah. It's weird watching this because, yes, I think our frame of reference now has moved from being 9/11, which this movie perfectly encapsulated, to being pandemic. And this movie still somehow manages to capture that vibe in 2024 looking back. As I had a similar response watching this. I was like, man, I'm seeing like the opening with the rioting and whatnot. I'm like, oh, this feels very prescient for today as well, with like a lot of the rage that seems to be happening in politics and then around the whole world. But I kept going back to those early shots and as you were talking about the pandemic. And so it's weird how this movie was made at one time, and yet now we can appreciate it or be fearful of it in a completely different kind of mindset. It's not about, post 9/11. It's now post COVID that we're still kind of living through right now. And it just, I don't know. I think that's what makes this movie a masterpiece and makes it art, is that you can watch it at different points in your life. I mean, you were just talking about, Francesco, about how you revisit it at certain points, and it kind of changes the feeling of the film. And so, yeah, I don't know what else to say. This movie, this fucking movie.
I was gonna say too, that thing like we talked about the the pandemic stuff, isolation, some of the other themes, but I watched it this morning, and like one of the lines that never really stood out to me until watching it again this morning is when Jim, or Killian's character, says like, "What do you mean there's no government? Like there's always a government. Like they're in a bunker, they have a plan." Yep. And this idea that like I think maybe the pandemic have changed this a little bit, but like I think everyone has their own criticisms of what happened in the pandemic, but like there is that moment of like maybe the government's not as organized as you thought they were. And like maybe there isn't a plan for this, and that's also really scary because I think at this point in time, maybe that wasn't as clear. I think maybe 9/11 might have been the first time of like the government can't protect you from everything, and I think the pandemic is like another example of that. But I thought that moment was really powerful, where he's not like able to accept that there's not someone who's going to swoop in and just save the day, right? And I think that's another terrifying element of like you're on your own.
Yeah, I took notes because what surprised me on this watch is how effectively it shows that the institutions that we think are there to save us fail. So where's the first place that Jim goes? He goes to a church. Religion failing him. It's he sees the church full of bodies and they're dead, and the priest attacks him. Like, okay, religion, churches, that stuff, dead. He has the comment, there's always a government, but there's not. Everything has collapsed. There's the idea of them finding transportation, try to get out of here. That collapsed. You can't get anywhere. And then where do we go? We go for the military. The military is going to save us. No, they're going to enslave the women and use them for repopulating the world, but not really. They're going to be using them for sexual assault, basically. And it's just like every single time that there is something good or something that you think is there to protect you, this movie is like, nah. The only thing that is good is that connection, because the only time that they are happy is in that middle road trip movie, where part of the movie where they're a family, and then it's the very end when they are running out there and saying hello. Like, that is the only thing that is going to save us. It's not these institutions that are supposed to be protecting us. And that's nihilistic, but also very hopeful.
Well, what's interesting about that too is, as a theme, is that they have to depend and trust each other to survive. Mm-hmm. But the whole thing is they have to be willing to throw each other under the bus at any point to also survive, right? Yes. And I think that analogy of like mankind and, giving people the olive branch to kind of trust one another when there is a reason to sometimes fear people is an interesting metaphor that I think the film touches on. Because like all those institutions you talked about, like that they can't trust. I thought it was interesting too that like they couldn't depend on the rain.
Yeah.
Right? Like that was the whole thing. Is like the guy was like, it's supposed to rain in England, and it's like, no, we have to go out and get water because we can't depend on the weather. Now, like there were so many like absurd things that you'd be like, well, you got the ideal setup, you got enough food for now, and at the end of the day, they would always have to depend on each other to go out and kind of make it, past the next milestone in the journey.
What a movie!
What a movie!
We're going about this all night. Great.
I know.
What a fucking movie!
So, do we want to start wrapping up and give this our ratings out of 5?
That sounds good.
1 out of 5, guys. No.
Terry, you're up first. How many blood drops in Brendan Gleeson's eye do you give this movie out of 5?
Oh, poor Frank.
I know.
What a good man. What a good father. What a good man. What a good... Oh my gosh, the moment that I also remember and just broke my heart watching this was when when Jim has a nightmare and he wakes up, or Frank wakes him up and he's like, "Thanks, Dad." It's like, like he is the adoptive father of this chosen family. It just, it's so good. But yeah, this movie's a masterpiece, and what I love about it is that it takes everything that I've loved about zombie films, remixes them, and is somehow, while touching on similar things that Romero has done or that other great zombie literature has done, takes it and still makes it fresh, makes it exciting, makes it terrifying, and it gives a little bit of optimism in a genre that is full of nihilism, and I love the earnestness of which the movie ends. It's five blood drops, unfortunately, for poor Brendan Gleeson. What about you, Mary Beth?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to give it 5. This movie fundamentally changed me as a young person, I believe. I think that it is a masterpiece. I think it is terrifying. Even, like, no matter how old I get, it still scares me, and I find new things to scare me, especially as parents are getting older, and just all of that stuff starts hitting harder. And I really love the ending where there's just a fucking, like a smash, not a smash cut, but just like a freeze frame of them as they crash into the gate. And it's just, so that it's 28 days later. And I just love that, and I just love that Danny Boyle isn't afraid to have like a little bit of fun with what he's doing. Cause I just think that's kind of silly in like a fun way, that it's just like a freeze frame of them in the backseat. And I love the movie and its editing style, and everything about it is just incredible. So yeah, 5 blood drops. And then Francesca, you have the final word. How many blood drops in Brendan Gleeson's eye do you give this?
I'm obviously going to go 5 in Brendan Gleeson's eye.
5's across the board.
5's across the board. It's to me, it's such a rare thing that you, like, having just come off this show, like, they nailed production design, they nailed score, they nailed the script, they nailed the acting, and they reinvented a genre that had a deep history and still pulled the best from its history. And I think it's damn near impossible, like, to nail all of the different departments firing on all cylinders, plus all of those other things that they were able to do with it. So it's 5 out of 5 for me. I just hope to God the new one's good, or I'm just going to forget that they made 2 more of these. I'm glad we didn't talk about 28 weeks later on this podcast, because I have lots of opinions on that. But yeah. I'm glad they got the original team back for the 28 years.
Oh, I really hope they pull it off. I really do. Because this movie holds a special part, and I think all of our hearts, honestly, based on what we've talked about. But I can't wait. I'm very excited for it. But Francesco, thank you so much for joining us to talk about your show and this fantastic movie. Are you online? Are you on social media? If so, where can our listeners find you? And the floor is yours to plug away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mary and Terry, for having me. This was a lot of fun, actually. I don't think I've talked about 28 Days Later for this long in a long time. Even now I'm pitching my wife why we need to go to Secret Cinema. That some of this conversation might have been hashed out.
Hell yeah!
Yeah, you can find me at FL Film online. Our show's Tales from the Void TV online, and we will be on Screambox in the US and on Super Channel 2 episodes a week from October 13th to 27th.
Heck yeah!
Woo.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Absolutely. All right, listeners, you've heard from us. We want to hear from you. What was your experience with 28 Days Later? Send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com or reach out to us directly on social media. I am at MB McAndrews on Twitter and at MB.McAndrews on Instagram.
And I'm at Gaily Dreadful everywhere. And if you cannot find this movie like I did, it is on archive.org right now. So that is how I ended up having to watch it, because I had a physical copy of this, but in my moves, I don't know where it is, and it's impossible to find otherwise. So thank you, archive.org.
Sony took them all off streaming because of 28 years later, I think. Rude asses. Anyway.
Ridiculous.
Fucking bullshit. Follow Scarred for Life on Twitter and Blue Sky at Scarred Podcast, and on us on Instagram at Scarred for Life Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe. And if you want to help support us, we do have a Patreon.
Thank you to Eric Power for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you everyone for listening. Please stay safe out there, but most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.